first time I felt something was wrong, it was because of the soup. I had just returned from work, tired and grateful for the soft light spilling from the kitchen window. It was almost midnight. My shift at the bank had stretched again, and I hoped to find some leftovers before crashing into bed. As I tiptoed into the kitchen, I saw her. Mama Aduni, the nanny. She was bent over the stove, stirring a pot with slow, deliberate movements, even though Chike was long asleep. "Good evening," I said, my voice breaking the silence. She turned abruptly, her eyes wide and startled like a cornered animal. "Ah, madam, I didn't hear you come in." Her reaction was strange, but I brushed it off. After all, this was the woman I'd hired to care for my son, Chike, a kind and sturdy woman with glowing recommendations. Still, I couldn't ignore the unease that coiled in my stomach as she turned back to her pot. The smell wafting from it wasn't the usual aroma of spices and fresh ingredients. It was acrid, almost metallic. "What are you cooking so late?" I asked. "Oh, just something for the spirits," she muttered before catching herself. "I mean, for Chike's stomach. He's been losing weight, no?" Her answer didn't sit right, but I was too tired to press further. I grabbed some bread and left her in the kitchen, her shadow stretching unnaturally long against the walls as I walked away. That night, I couldn't sleep. My dreams were filled with strange whispers, like someone humming a song I couldn't understand. When I woke up drenched in sweat, I told myself it was just the stress of work. But deep down, I knew it was something more. Something about Mama Aduni wasn't right, and I was about to find out just how wrong I was. Chike had always been a cheerful boy. His laughter would fill the house, even when my husband and I were too busy to notice. But ever since Mama Aduni came into our lives, his laughter had grown quieter, replaced by something I couldn't quite place: fear. It started with the nightmares. "Mummy," Chike said one evening as I tucked him into bed, "do shadows have faces?" I paused, confused. "Faces? What do you mean?" His small hands gripped his blanket tightly. "At night, I see faces in the shadows. They watch me from the corners of the room. Sometimes I hear them whisper my name." I tried to laugh it off. "It's just your imagination, Chike. There are no faces, only shadows. Say your prayers and you'll sleep fine." He nodded reluctantly and shut his eyes. But as I turned off the light, I couldn't ignore the unease creeping over me. When I glanced back at him, he was staring at the ceiling, wide-eyed, as though he knew something I didn't. The nightmares got worse. Night after night, Chike would wake up screaming, his body drenched in sweat. He started refusing to sleep in his room, begging to stay in mine or in the living room. When I asked him what was wrong, he would shake his head and mumble about the lady with the long hands. I decided to confront Mama Aduni. "Is Chike okay during the day?" I asked her casually one morning as she braided his hair on the veranda. She didn't look up. "He's fine. Children are like that sometimes. Maybe it's the spirits trying to play with him." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. Spirits? Was she joking? But when I looked at her face, her expression was serious, her dark eyes glinting with something I couldn't decipher. From then on, I started paying more attention. The way she watched Chike when she thought no one was looking, the strange herbs she sprinkled in his bathwater, and the way Chike grew quieter and thinner with each passing day. Something was happening to my son, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know what it was. It was a Saturday afternoon when I stumbled upon the doll. Chike was at his friend's house, and my husband had left for his usual weekend football match. The house was eerily quiet, except for the rhythmic sound of Mama Aduni sweeping the front yard. I decided to use the rare free time to organize Chike's room, which had grown cluttered in recent weeks. As I shifted a pile of Chike's toys under his bed, I felt something odd, a soft, cloth-like object wrapped in what felt like rough twine. I pulled it out and froze. It was a doll, but not the kind Chike would ever own. The figure was crudely made from black cloth, stuffed with what felt like dried leaves. Its head was covered with a piece of white fabric painted with 2 hollow eyes and a red slash for a mouth. Around its tiny neck, a string of cowries hung, and its chest was pierced with small, rusty nails. My stomach churned. I had never seen anything like it before, and the sight of it filled me with dread. "Who put this under my son's bed?" "Madame?" I jumped, nearly dropping the doll. Mama Aduni stood at the doorway, her hands gripping her broom. Her eyes darted to the doll, and for the first time I saw her mask slip. Her expression wasn't one of surprise or confusion, it was of anger. "Where did you find that?" she asked, her voice low and tight. "In Chike's room," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "What is this doing here?" She snatched the doll from my hand with surprising force. "It's just a toy. Boys like strange things sometimes." "No," I said firmly. "This isn't a toy, and I've never seen it before." "What is it, Mama Aduni?" Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment I thought she might confess. But then she forced a smile. "Madam, don't worry yourself over small things. I'll take care of it." She turned and walked out of the room, the doll clutched tightly in her hand. That night I locked my bedroom door for the first time in years. I barely slept after finding the doll. Something told me that Mama Aduni wasn't being truthful, and my unease grew stronger by the day. The following night, I was in the kitchen washing dishes when I heard it, a faint whispering sound coming from the window. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the sound grew clearer, almost like a conversation happening just beyond the glass. Curious and uneasy, I turned off the faucet and leaned closer. "The boy is ready." I froze. The voice was raspy, low, and unfamiliar. "You must hurry, before they suspect." My heart pounded in my chest as I peeked through the curtain. I couldn't see much in the dim light, but I spotted the silhouette of a figure hunched near the edge of the compound, their face obscured by darkness. I backed away from the window, my hands trembling. "Mama Aduni," I called out, my voice shaking. She appeared almost immediately, as though she'd been standing close by. "Yes, madam? Were you just outside?" She tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Outside?" "No, madam. I was in my room." I nodded slowly, pretending to believe her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the voice I'd heard was somehow connected to her. Later that night, as I lay awake in bed, Chike tiptoed into the room. "Mummy, can I sleep here tonight?" I sat up and pulled him close. "Why, darling? Did you have another nightmare?" He nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. I heard them again. The whispers. They said my name this time. My blood ran cold. Whatever was happening in my house, it wasn't my imagination. And it wasn't going to stop on its own. The next morning, I couldn't shake the unease. Chike refused to leave my side, clinging to me with a desperation that broke my heart. "Mummy, promise me you won't let them take me," he whispered, his small hands gripping mine. I promised him, but my mind was racing. Something had to be done. When I returned to Chike's room later that day, I decided to search every corner. If that strange doll was hidden under his bed, what else could be there? My husband was skeptical when I told him about my concerns, brushing it off as paranoia. "You're overthinking this, Ada," he said. But I couldn't let it go. It was during this search that I found something even more disturbing. Hidden under his pillow was a small charm, an amulet wrapped in red and black cloth, tied with a thin strip of leather. The smell of crushed herbs clung to it, pungent and sharp. "Mama Aduni," I called out sharply, my voice echoing through the house. She appeared moments later, her face calm, but her eyes flickering with something I couldn't place. "Yes, madam?" "What is this?" I demanded, holding up the charm. Her gaze darkened for a split second before she forced a smile. "Ah, madam, it's just a protective charm, for Chike's health and safety." "Protective?" I said, my voice rising. "Without my knowledge, without my permission? What are you doing to my son?" "Madam, please don't misunderstand," she said, her tone smooth. "These things are common where I come from. I meant no harm." But her words only fueled my anger. "You will leave this house by the end of the day," I said, my voice shaking. She flinched, but quickly masked her reaction. "As you wish, madam." Yet as she turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something in her expression, a mix of fear and anger. It was as if I had disrupted something far more sinister than I could understand. That night, I burned the charm in the backyard, praying fervently for Chike's safety. The flames hissed and spat as though protesting its destruction. The next day, I took Chike to our church. Our pastor, a wise and perceptive man, had always been a source of comfort. I explained everything to him. The doll, the charm, the whispers, and my growing suspicion of Mama Aduni. He listened quietly, his brow furrowing deeper with each word. When I finished, he leaned forward and clasped my hands. "Ada, you were right to come. This is not ordinary. This woman is not who she claims to be." "What should I do?" I asked, my voice trembling. She is likely using your son as a vessel for something dark, he said gravely. This is not a game. Pray over him every night, and do not let her near him again. But you must also confront her with the truth. Evil hates the light. I left the church that day, determined to protect my son, no matter the cost. When I returned home, I found Mama Aduni sitting in the living room, her hands folded in her lap. She looked up as I entered, and for the first time her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You've been to the pastor," she said, her voice cold. "How do you know that?" I asked, my heart pounding. Her smile widened, and for a moment I saw something unnerving in her eyes, something inhuman. "Madam, some things are better left alone. You've stirred waters you do not understand." I stood my ground, even as fear clawed at my chest. "Leave my house now." She rose slowly, her gaze locked on mine. "Very well," she said, her voice dripping with malice. "But remember, madam, some doors once opened can never be closed." That night, as I prayed over Chike, the lights flickered, and the air grew heavy. It was as though the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. After I forced Mama Aduni to leave, the house felt lighter. It was as if an oppressive weight had been lifted. For the first time in weeks, Chike slept soundly, and the nightmares seemed to cease. I wanted to believe it was over, that the terror had left with her. But deep down, I knew better. 2 days later, I went into the storeroom to gather old clothes for donation. It was a room I rarely entered, dimly lit, cluttered with boxes, and musty from years of neglect. As I sorted through the piles, my hand brushed against something damp. I pulled it out, and my stomach churned. It was a piece of cloth, soaked in what looked like dried blood. The fabric was tied in a strange knot, and when I opened it, I found a tuft of Chike's hair inside. My legs gave way, and I sank to the floor, my heart pounding in my ears. This wasn't just mischief or superstition. This was evil. My first instinct was to call the pastor. He arrived quickly, bringing 2 other prayer warriors with him. Together, we prayed over the house, anointing every room with oil. As they prayed, the air grew heavy again, like it had that night with Mama Aduni's warning. "There's something still here," the pastor said, his voice stern. "She left behind a connection." "Connection?" I asked, clutching Chike, who stood trembling beside me. "Yes. Whatever she was doing, it wasn't complete. This cloth is part of it, but there could be more. We must find it." For hours we combed through the house. The pastor prayed over every object we found, herbs hidden in corners, strange symbols drawn faintly on walls, and even a bottle filled with a dark, sticky liquid under Chike's wardrobe. Each discovery sent chills down my spine. As we burned the items in the backyard, the flames roared unnaturally high, and a loud, piercing wail echoed through the air. It was a sound I would never forget, like the cry of something ancient and vengeful. "Whatever power she tried to wield here," the pastor said, "it's broken now, but you must stay vigilant." That night, I sat beside Chike's bed, watching him sleep peacefully for the first time in weeks. But even as I held his small hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. It had been a week since the burning, and life was slowly returning to normal. My husband and I began spending more time with Chike, determined to make up for the weeks of neglect. The house was quiet again, and the shadows no longer felt menacing. But one evening, as I sat in the living room reading, there was a knock at the door. It was late, almost midnight, and my husband had already gone to bed. My first thought was that it might be a neighbor, but when I opened the door, my heart stopped. There she was, Mama Aduni. She stood there in the pale moonlight, her face gaunt and her eyes sunken. She looked nothing like the confident woman I had once hired. Her clothes were tattered, and her hands trembled as she gripped a small bag. "Madam, please," she said, her voice hoarse. "I need to talk to you." I wanted to slam the door in her face, but something in her expression stopped me. She looked broken, defeated. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my voice firm. "I need to confess," she whispered. "Please, let me in. I can't take it anymore." Against my better judgment, I let her in. She sat on the edge of the couch, clutching her bag tightly. Her hands shook as she opened it, revealing a small black book. "This is what they gave me," she said, her voice trembling. "They said it would make me rich, powerful. All I had to do was take the boy." My blood ran cold. "Who are they?" I demanded. She shook her head. "It doesn't matter. I broke their rules when I left. They're coming for me now." I just wanted to say I'm sorry before it's too late." Her words were like a punch to my chest. This wasn't just about her. It was about Chike, my family, and the darkness that had tried to consume us. As she stood to leave, she handed me the book. "Destroy it," she said, "and pray for me." I watched her disappear into the night, her shadow stretching unnaturally long under the streetlights. The air was heavy again, and I knew one thing for certain: this wasn't the end. After Mama Aduni left, I locked the door and sat at the dining table, staring at the small black book she had handed me. Its cover was worn and unmarked, the edges frayed, as though it had been passed through many hands. I hesitated, feeling the weight of what it might contain. When I finally opened it, I was met with pages covered in strange symbols and crude drawings. The text was written in a language I couldn't understand, but the images were chilling. There were depictions of dark figures standing over children, circles drawn with animals at their edges, and crude sketches of dolls that resembled the one I had found under Chike's bed. At the center of the book was a name written in bold red ink: Chike. I gasped, my hands trembling as I flipped the pages. The next entry detailed what appeared to be a ritual, a step-by-step process to seal the vessel, my son. I slammed the book shut, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't just evil. It was calculated, deliberate, and it had nearly succeeded. I called the pastor immediately, and within an hour he arrived with 2 elders from the church. They examined the book with grave expressions before one of them spoke. "This is a covenant book," he said. "It's used to bind someone's destiny to dark forces. If this ritual had been completed, Chike's life and soul would have been taken." My knees buckled, and I leaned against the wall for support. "Thank God she didn't finish it," the pastor added. "But this book is dangerous. We need to destroy it immediately." We prayed over the book for hours, asking for divine protection and guidance. When we finally threw it into the fire, the flames roared higher than I had ever seen, burning with an intensity that seemed unnatural. The smell was acrid and suffocating, but we didn't stop until the book was reduced to ash. I thought the destruction of the book would mark the end of our ordeal, but I was wrong. Evil doesn't let go so easily. That night, as we prepared for bed, the house grew unnaturally cold. The lights flickered, and the air felt heavy, as if something unseen was pressing down on us. Chike ran into my room, his face pale with fear. "Mummy, it's in my room," he whispered. My husband and I rushed to his room, only to find his belongings strewn across the floor. The windows rattled violently, though there was no wind. A deep, guttural growl echoed from the shadows. We grabbed Chike and ran to the living room, where the pastor and his prayer warriors were still present. They immediately sprang into action, their voices rising in fervent prayer. The atmosphere grew tense as the growling sound moved through the house, pounding against the walls like a living thing. The air crackled with unseen energy, and I held Chike tightly, whispering prayers of my own. The pastor shouted, "In the name of Jesus, leave this house!" There was a loud, ear-piercing shriek, and suddenly the oppressive presence vanished. The house fell silent, and the air felt light again. "It's over," the pastor said, his voice firm. "The evil has been cast out." In the days that followed, the house felt normal again. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, and Chike seemed to be returning to his cheerful self. I spent every moment with him, vowing never to let anything take me away from my child again. We deep-cleaned the house, removing anything that had even the slightest connection to Mama Aduni. The pastor and his team continued to visit, offering prayers and words of encouragement. I couldn't shake the guilt I felt. As a mother, I should have noticed something was wrong sooner. My work had consumed me, and my son had nearly paid the price. 2 weeks after her visit, we received news about Mama Aduni. She had been found wandering the streets of her village, muttering incoherently. The villagers said she appeared haunted, as if tormented by unseen forces. When I heard the news, my heart was conflicted. She had tried to harm my son, yet seeing her broken like that stirred a strange pity in me. The pastor encouraged me to forgive her, saying, "Evil uses people as tools, but they are victims too. Forgiveness frees you, not them." Chike slowly began to heal, though the experience left scars. He became more cautious and often clung to me in moments of fear. We enrolled him in counseling, where he could process his emotions and rebuild his trust in the world. I also made changes in my own life. cutting back on work to spend more time with my family. Our experience taught us painful but necessary lessons. As parents, we learned that our children's safety and emotional well-being must always come first. Neglecting Chike in the name of work had nearly cost us everything. The story spread among our friends and family, serving as a cautionary tale about vigilance and the dangers of trusting blindly. Months later, our home was filled with laughter again. Chike grew stronger, braver, and more grounded in his faith. As for me, I carried the lessons of those dark days with me, using them to guide every decision I made as a mother. Evil had tried to take my family, but through faith, vigilance, and love, we overcame it, and I vowed never to let anything threaten my family again.